This is Diane from Boho Stamper. Thanks for joining. This is our second in a Valentine's Day card series. So today we're going to concentrate on using some of the paper and stamp sets that we already have in our stash without adding anything new. I pulled out a bunch of my pretty floral papers and 6x6 sheets and booklets. I have a ton of paper that we need to use. So I got some scrap cardstock out of my stash here, and anything I could find that I thought looked a little bit like it would work for Valentine's. So we had some Maha design and Prima design paper, and I think I even have Love Lizzie papers, and here's some Stampin' Up 6x6 sheets, beautiful roses and hearts. And while I was going through all of the paper, I ran across some small 6x6 glitter sheets. I had a gold, a silver, and a pink. And as soon as I saw that, I knew that I wanted to cut out some detailed hearts with that. So I dug through my stamps and dies, found my Detailed Heart Thinlit set, and I also knew that there was a coordinating stamp set to go with that. So I pulled that out as well, but I don't think that we ended up using the stamps out of that. So then I picked out a couple of sheets, finally decided, from an old Once Upon a Time card packet that I had. And then I also realized that I had some red velvet that I got at Christmas, and I wanted to do one of the detailed hearts with that as well. So I got the Once Upon a Time booklet out, and inside that were some pretty pinks and purples, and they have gold glitter, and of course I cut out silver and pink, so I didn't have a gold glitter heart, but still pretty paper to work in a Valentine. After I found a couple of sheets of paper, then I was able to coordinate some cardstock. So the one I used with Rococo Rose and Sahara Sand, and the other one I used with Retired Fresh Fig and some Smoky Slate. They just matched the colors in the designer series paper really well. All of my card bases started out as a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base, and then I cut my coordinating cardstock to 4 inches by 5 1/4. Now this one I'm using my Stampin' Seal Plus on, and I think I must have been pushing just a little too hard on the back of the paper, and I started to peel it, but I was able to go back over and get it to lay down flat. So I just have to remember that you really don't have to press hard with this stuff, and it is pretty sticky. So once I layered the Rococo Rose onto the Sahara Sand, I knew that I couldn't lay the detailed heart directly onto the design paper because it was going to get lost in the background. And I really didn't want to put anything on there that was too huge and was going to cover up the design paper. I mean, that was the point of using some of this pretty paper, because we wanted to show the designs off. So I found the Stitch Nested Labels dies and cut one of those out for our first card. And then I was able to pull out the one stamp set, Heartfelt, and looked for a stamp that was going to be small enough to fit into the die shape and still leave enough room for our detailed die cut heart. So From My Heart to Yours seemed kind of appropriate, and I thought that would fit down into the die. And I didn't want to use tone on tone ink. I was afraid that the Sahara Sand wouldn't show up really well on the Sahara Sand paper. So I did pull out Tip Top Taupe ink, which is also a retired color. I wish it wasn't because it's a perfect shade for this. And tested it out, made sure that it was working okay, and that it still had ink left in the ink pad because it's been up there for quite a while. And it was exactly what I wanted. So I pulled my nested label die, lined up my stamp, and added it to our little label. And taking the pink die cut detailed heart, I thought that laying it directly onto the die cut might also make it blend into the background a little too much, so I decided to pop it up with some Stampin' Dimensionals. And the little flowers on this die are just a great size to put these dimensionals on the back because they are easily hidden, and you can get enough on there to get your die cut glued down firmly. You really want it to wobble and rip off. So I pulled out a whole bunch of my Valentine stamp sets and dies. I did the same thing here just recently with my Christmas stamps because we're going to get ready to do Christmas in the making beginning the 25th of January here, and then the 25th of each month we're going to go back and make some Christmas cards because I get these stamp sets and then I only make 1 or 2 cards with them and I set them aside because something new came out, and I never always go back to them and use them some more. So that's what we're trying to do here. I confess that when I was done making these cards, UPS did drop off the new die set that I had ordered to go with the new Always in My Heart stamp set. And it has a detailed heart in there as well. So I might be using that whole set in next week's Valentine, but that'll be out of the current catalog. So if you have the January to June mini catalog, you can get the Always in My Heart stamp set and stamp along next week, and we'll be right on top of things here come February 14th. So the second card is basically the same thing. This is the one that the designer series paper really looked kind of pretty with the fresh fig. So I got a 4 by 5¼ inch panel of Smoky Slate. Layered that onto the fresh fig. And for this one, I decided I was just going to lay the heart down in one layer on top of the designer paper. And then I wanted to stamp my sentiment right into the design. So I didn't think our tuxedo black memento ink would show up on there. I thought maybe if I embossed my greeting on there, it would look kind of pretty. So I found a stamp in an old Simon Says Stamp Valentine set that says I adore you. It was nice and small, and I thought would fit perfectly in the corner of this panel. So got out our embossing supplies and started with my anti-static powder, which I have an embossing buddy still from Stampin' Up. They don't carry the embossing buddy anymore, but there are a lot of other products that you can find online that do the same thing. And this is just going to keep your embossing powder from sticking to parts of the designer paper that you don't necessarily want it to stick to. I'm trying to get my very small stamp lined up onto my acrylic block. I didn't really want to use a bigger block because I didn't want any overhanging ink to stick to it and get on my card. So here's my embossing buddy, and I'm just going to wipe off the corner where I'm going to heat emboss. And then using Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that you actually can use just as a stamping ink right onto your cardstock. But this stuff is just perfect for heat embossing. So tested it out, made sure that my stamp pad was sticky enough there, and then lined my little greeting up down on the bottom right, stamped, and then added some detailed silver embossing powder. And I just add this over a little coffee filter so that I can put my extra back into the container and not waste it. A small container of embossing powder will last you for years. I have a lot of different colors and I've had them forever. So oftentimes forget to use embossing powder, but it really is a beautiful addition. And it really can make a huge difference and class up a card a lot. So we have the powder onto our card front now, and I'm heating up my heat tool. So we're going to use the heat gun and melt the embossing powder to the paper, which is always kind of fun to watch. If you've never done heat embossing, this is really fun. You watch it and it just turns into this shiny little sentiment stamped on there. It's really pretty. Unfortunately, I thought that my greeting still was lost in the background, and I could barely see it. So I took a piece of fresh fig and thought I would emboss on that, and we could die cut a little label for the front of our card and see if that would make it any better. So taking my fresh fig and starting all over again. I just got my embossing buddy and powdered the cardstock a little bit. And I could have cut this section out of my video, but wanted to show you that even when you don't like something on your card, there's usually a way around it, and then your card doesn't go to waste. So I used the Versamark ink again and stamped my sentiment. Added the detailed silver embossing powder. And my heat gun is still kind of warm already, so this should probably melt pretty quickly here. It's a good idea to always cap your powder and set it aside as soon as you're done, because if this stuff spills, it's really a pain to clean up. So here you can see the powder is melting now and turning to a shiny silver. And I think that's going to stand out on the card front much better. So pulling out those stitch nested dies again, I just wanted to find one that was just big enough to go around this greeting. I didn't want to overwhelm, again, the front of the card because the whole point is showing off some of the pretty paper that we have. I decided the die that would fit around the sentiment and ran that through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Once we had that cut out, I was able to layer it right over top of where I originally had stamped on the design paper. I just put my dies away here so that I don't end up losing one. And decided this would probably be better popped up a little bit. So adhered the designer series paper to the Smoky Slate panel. And my designer series paper is cut just 1/4 of an inch smaller on each side there than the panel. So they would have been 3 3/4. You had 4 by 5 1/4, so 3 3/4 by 5. I will double check that here. So our card base was 5 1/2 by 4, and then the designer paper was 5 and about 5 1/8, I guess, by 3 3/4. I only wanted to have a very small card panel border around that paper. I wanted to lay the die cut heart flat onto my panel, so I used a fine point art glitter glue on the back of this die cut. This has a really fine point that I was able to get glue on some of the little pieces of that die cut. And here I just lay an acrylic block on the top of it and give the glue a chance to adhere while I can get another piece of my card ready to put together. I grabbed a couple of dimensionals, added them to the back of our little embossed panel, and layered it over top of where I originally embossed. And I think that stands out a whole lot better. I didn't add any embellishments or stones or gems or anything else to either one of these cards because I thought that the glitter heart was enough, but you are more than welcome to add whatever embellishments you might have. There are beautiful colored stones that would look gorgeous on these cards. Some little silver pearls might be pretty on the silver one. I just really wanted to keep them a little bit plainer. More than likely one of them is going to be for hubby, so he doesn't necessarily care if he has rhinestones on his card or not. Now the red velvet, excuse me, the red velvet die cut heart, I didn't have anything planned for this, so I went with a real red card base, matched the color of the velvet, and I thought that would probably look kind of elegant if I just used Whisper White card panel on that. And remember that we're moving from Whisper White now to basic white cardstock in Stampin' Up. So if you're shopping for more white, you're probably going to want to look for the basic white now. So again, I'm starting with my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base. And somewhere here, pulling out my Whisper White. And we're just going to cut a panel of this. And I thought that maybe if we embossed our panel, that would be kind of pretty. So I pulled out a couple of embossing folders. I have quite a few embossing folders as well and tend to forget about those. We set these things aside and don't always remember to pull them out. So I ended up looking at Softly Falling, which looks like little snowflakes falling, or the heart, and I forget the name of this die or embossing folder. And I actually have two of these because I was using one of them when I was making invitations during my son and daughter-in-law's wedding, and I cut the front of my embossing folder because I wanted to use it on another project. I just used washi tape to tape them back together, and it works just fine. So here we have our 4 by 5¼ panel, and then I just had to layer it into my embossing folder and decide if I wanted to have it with a lot of embossed hearts or just a few. Deciding that I wanted just a few of the hearts, I ran that through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine as well. Reminder, when you're putting your embossing folders through your machine, to put the folded side together first. Sometimes if you put it with the open edge through your machine first, you can crack the folded part of your embossing folder. So if you don't intentionally want to cut your folder in half like I did on this one, you might be kind of disappointed. So we just ran that through the embossing folder, and that in itself is a pretty card, but I do have my velvet detailed heart. So I think we're going to lay the heart down on this panel flat as well. I'm going to adhere the embossed panel to my real red card base, realizing that when we have an embossed panel, it's often much better to use a liquid glue because you have the different texture paper there on the back, and sometimes just using a tape runner doesn't give you a very good bond between your papers. So I used my combo multi glue, which works perfect. And then for the back of my heart, sometimes I don't like to use the multi-liquid glue on something like this because if it seeps out a little bit, it does tend to stay tacky around it. The combo, it's a good thing and a bad thing because it makes it a repositionable glue to use when you want to move something, but it's not always nice when you go to pick up a card and your hand sticks to the front. So again, I used my art glitter glue and just added a few dots around the back of my die cut. This also dries clear, but really doesn't leave any residue. So once I had the glue dotted onto this, I just used my tweezers so that I didn't stick my hand in the glue, and then laid it onto my panel. I was afraid if I got glue on my fingers, I might pull some of that velvet flocking from the paper and smear it onto the embossed hearts. So once I had that position where I wanted, I just laid it and then put my acrylic block back on there again for a couple of seconds to help the glue adhere to the panel. While that's sitting, I can decide what I wanted to do as far as my greeting. So again, I had all these stamp sets and found Bloomin' Love had a really nice font that just says love you. I didn't want to make it too big and cover up my die cut heart. So I tried this love you stamp and it was going to fit in the corner of this card well. So I pulled out my real red ink pad and a scrap piece of Whisper White. The Bloomin' Love also has, oh, actually, the Bloomin' Love is the stamp set that goes with the Detailed Heart die that I used on all three of these cards. So again, I just wanted to use a small acrylic block for this stamp and stamp them onto the Whisper White. Which did not actually leave a good impression on my first stamp. So I'm going to try that again, but my paper was a little bit dirty. So I decided to use the back side. And had I been thinking, I probably would have lined this up a little better than I did, because I wanted to cut just a strip out, and then using my trimmer, I had to play around quite a bit because I had stamped my sentiment on this white not very even. So after I decided that I wasn't going to die cut with our stitch nesting dies again, I had this idea that I could use our punch, our tag punch, that allows you to cut strips of paper. And there are actually 2 tag ends and 3 different sizes for each tag end. So there are 6 possibilities for this punch for your strips of paper. I think it's 3/4 of an inch, 1 inch, and it might be 1/2 an inch. I'll see if I can look that up while we're getting this paper ready. So while I fidget with my trimmer here and try to get my love you cut out straight, it's kind of handy. The Stampin' trimmer has a little acrylic guide that you lay across your paper when you're cutting, and that guide is almost sort of a magnifier. So if you get the words lined up evenly inside that acrylic piece, you can get it pretty straight. Came out a little bit wider than I wanted to, so like I said, I fidgeted through a few times and finally got it cut down to where I wanted it to be. Oh, let me see. The Pick a Punch label. See if I can find the measurements. Our lovely labels Pick a Punch allows you to punch a 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and a 1 inch strip. And like I said, there are two different punches for the end, so you can make some different designs here. Got a couple rough edges, so I just used my bone folder to go over the paper and smooth those down a little bit. And then I thought that I would probably line my greeting up along the left side of my card panel, so I only wanted to punch the right side to give it some interest there. And then I can cut my edge off however long I need it to be so that I can line it up on the left. I was going to originally just put some dimensionals onto the back of this and add it to the front of the card. And did I trust myself to just trim that with my paper snips? Not at all. So it was still going to be a little bit too long. And I cut the punched edge off to make it a little bit shorter, put it back into my lovely label punches, and made it just a shorter greeting. There it is. It almost looks like a little arrow. Kind of appropriate. So I got the Stampin' Mini Dimensionals out and was all ready to put that onto the card. And I know that I've seen a lot of demonstrators will use either their Stampin' Write markers or even their Stampin' Blends or their stamp pad and add some ink to the edge of their paper. I've not ever been very good at that. When I add ink to the edge of my paper to make it stand out a little bit better, I always seem to get too much on there and it looks sloppy to me. So I decided just to cut another strip out of real red and use my lovely labels punch. So I cut a 3/4 inch strip. Because my white strip is just a hair under 3/4 of an inch, the red piece worked out just fine. So we put the 3/4 of an inch strip into the punch and cut the edge out. And now I can take my stamped label and line it up and make my real red border as small as I want it to be. So this was kind of just a happy accident the way it all worked out with this label. In hindsight, I really would have been more careful about how I punched that or how I stamped that greeting and planned it a little bit so that my tag would have been a little bit straighter. But it all worked out, so I was happy. Just used a little bit of the Stampin' Seal Plus, and I wanted to make sure that I did get some on the edges so that it stayed on the red background. And I'm just pushing a little bit of the tape back to the back side of the label where it was hanging out a little bit so that it didn't leave any sticky residue on my tag. And once I have it centered on the red background, I can trim. I got really brave here and just did it with scissors. Oh, didn't get cut and I didn't ruin it, so it was a good day. Now we can use those little mini dimensionals. And our Love You card will stand out a little bit nicer than just adhering white on white. So as you can see, just from using products that I already had, and I encourage you to do the same, I was able to come up with 3 Valentines that really didn't take all that long. So thanks for joining me. I hope this inspires you. Create a card and send a smile to somebody today. And join me next week and we'll do Valentine card number 3. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thanks.